J.T. Crowley is Talking Books. On this show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world. They'll give you their take on the writing process and how to create the secret sauce of page-turning deliciousness. Let's get into that magical mixture of the art and science of creativity. Here's J.T. Crowley, author of The Smart Kids, and your podcast host.
Hello, I'm J.T. Crowley, and today I have another fascinating author for you. Neil Boss, a British author, and he's here to talk about his debut novel, the first in the duology, Maybe It's About Time. Neil best describes himself as an excellent cook, decent writer, average fly fisher, and bad guitarist. He grew up in a middle-class area of London, but as a child, he defined himself as a working-class kid. Growing up as a teenager in London in the 70s, where life was beginning to become less inhibited, with the bars, clubs, and rock and punk music bands emerging on the scene, this was Neil's forte. He loved this time of his life. He started to study marine biology at Bangor University in North Wales, but the social scene was not quite up to his expectations, and he soon returned back to the London life, where he then went on and to finish his degree in marine biology. However, the world of science didn't quite sparkle enough for him, so he undertook a master's degree at Henley Management College. He's done various things in his life, but he developed a penchant for life as a high finance person. He's worked in the City of London, where he cut his teeth in that tough competitive world, working for companies such as Ernst & Young and Deloitte. His talents as advising large corporate conglomerate clients on mergers, takeovers, acquisitions was phenomenal, and it took him all around the world. Neil stepped aside from that cutthroat game at the end of 2019 and started to write his book, Maybe It's About Time. Neil has always loved writing, and one of his school reports from his English teacher said, has the potential to be a very good creative writer. And when you read his book, everybody, they were right. For me, this book has been cleverly written. The stories and the characters blend beautifully together. The traumas and the tension woven into the plot are tantalizing, real, as they hit the pages. So let's invite Neil onto the show to tell us more about his book, Maybe It's About Time. Neil, come and join me.
Good afternoon, John. Good to see you.
Well, you can write a book, can't you?
It's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
You can. So, Neil, let's go to the book itself.
Sure.
The first chapter of a book, without a doubt, is a pivotal moment for any author. For this is the one golden shot they've got at getting the reader's attention. The chapter has to set the overall scene. You might have an amazing ending with lots of tension and twists throughout the book leading up to the finale. But if you haven't got the first chapter right, the readers aren't even going to give you a chance to see what's in the storylines. Now, when I look at your first chapter, it gripped me straight away. And I think a lot of listeners and readers are going to find this as as the case is here. So let's go to chapter 1, Points Failure.
Okay.
Here you introduce us to Marcus Barlow, a partner in a consultancy firm that advises large corporate conglomerates about mergers, takeovers, acquisitions, and other financial issues for astronomical fees, everybody. Believe you me, the fees are in the millions. And you introduce us to his wife, Alice, a newly found veganist living in their £3 million home. You start to mention what's happening in China, Wuhan, the virus. For this chapter is set in January 2020. Now, the book is not about COVID, but COVID is in the background, everybody. So, Neil, my question is, how did you structure this chapter? And do you think it's decisive enough as an opening gambit to your amazing book?
Well, thanks for the introduction, John. I think that when I started to construct the chapter, I wanted to introduce Marcus and some of the idiosyncrasies that permeate throughout the novel. And I did that around the construct of his daily commute, something he'd done for over 20 years. And it's a journey that millions of commuters do every year. His was from Waterloo, which is one of the main stations into the city of London, and out to the green leafy suburbs of Weybridge, where Marcus lived. And I wanted to use the chapter to introduce his family, but also the start of the struggles he has in his job, with that daily commute, that routine. And that often comes through really banal things like, do you get a seat on the platform? What happens when the trains are delayed, which is becoming more and more frequent. And it's actually starting to build a tension with that daily routine that Marcus is beginning to struggle with. And for those people that, like myself, commuted every day into London when I wasn't traveling, it's often something that can be used constructively. And Marcus is a very observant person. I think probably the same as I am in the way in which I go about life. I'm always looking around at things, questioning, looking at them. And I wanted to build that into his character. And even the choice of what fast food he picks the night that he's stranded at Waterloo Station. It's really a description of that, the mundane nature of commuting. But for someone like Marcus, it was very real.
Because your book, there's a lot of tension in your book. I think you've done a brilliant job with it, putting the tension in the pages. That's not easy. And for you, it's me, I've just picked up, this comes naturally to you. But I want to go now, Neil, to chapter 2, because this is still the introduction, everybody. This is still Neil building up the story. But chapter 2, every little helps. Now, this is you introducing us to the second main protagonist in your book, Claire. Claire Halford, a single mum, struggling to support her 2 children, Kyle and Alexa, living off universal credit. She's caught stealing food from the local Tesco's Express as she's got no money to feed her kids. You introduce us to Gavin, the social worker she has who supports her. You introduce us to Lester Primus, the local Tesco manager who puts food aside for her. And you introduce us to daytime TV, programs like The Chase, with who she goes and watches with Miss Mahoney, the caretaker downstairs in the flats. And you even introduce us to the pompous Andrew, the security guard. Now, this character, Claire, who's in her 20s, and the setting, a council flat in mid-London, is in stark contrast to Marcus Barlow, the main character, who's wealthy and in his 50s. Why have you, in your first 2 chapters of your book, here you are setting out the 2 contrasting characters, one wealthy, rich, the other one a totally different character. Why? What's the purpose here?
Well, one of the themes of the book, John, is social inequality. And not everybody has the same opportunities and chances as everybody else. And although the pandemic and the coronavirus is a backdrop to the novel, one of the things that was said at the time is that we're all going through this together. But not everybody experienced the pandemic in the same way. What I wanted to do was highlight the difference between people that were relatively affluent and well off versus those people that were struggling. And if people read the book and think, well, at face value, it's very much a satire of the world of professional services that AI worked in and Marcus Barlow, the main character, works in, I think that's only really telling half the story, because the other half is very much around the contrast in lives between people that are relatively affluent and those that are struggling. And I wanted to introduce Claire into the book to hold a mirror up to Marcus, to compare his life with hers. And for the first half of the novel, it's written very much in alternate chapters. So there's a chapter about Marcus and what's going on in his world, and there's a chapter going on about the next chapter follows Claire's life and what's happening in her world, and they're vastly different in how they're written. The link around all of this is, as you say, Gavin, her social worker. Now, Gavin lives in the same flats as Marcus. Marcus has a pied-à-terre flat in London, so he doesn't necessarily have to commute every single day. And when he's in the office in London, he will often go back to his pied-à-terre flat in Bayswater. And Gavin is the hub around which the two main characters revolve. And he will see Marcus once a week. Another theme that runs through the book is about food. I mean, I'm a very keen cook myself, but Marcus and Gavin enjoy one night a week where they both sit down and alternate weeks cook for each other, and they talk about their days. Conversely, as her social worker, Gavin calls on Claire quite regularly and talks about her days. And there is a sort of overlap between the two, but Gavin is actually the hub around which the other two characters revolve. And for the first half of the book, I've allowed those two to carry along on parallel tracks. But there is a key point in the book, engineered by Gavin, believing it would be good for both of the characters in their respective lives to meet each other. And it's at that point that the two contrasting backgrounds are actually merged, and then they start to interact as two characters. And for the second half of the book, it then runs with the two characters interconnected, and then deals with the relationship that comes between Marcus and Claire.
Oh, yes. And of course, the dinner nights are always Tuesday nights, aren't they?
Tuesday night is
dinner night.
Tuesday night is Marcus's dinner night with Gavin, if he hasn't got other commitments or anything like that. Yeah. And the relationship between Gavin and Marcus is also quite an interesting one.
Oh, I'm coming to that.
Okay, fine.
But yes, and the meals, everybody, they're quite posh meals. Neil, one of the, chapters for me that I loved the most was chapter 10.
Right.
Wonderwall.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay.
And because I think this is a game-changing chapter. And I'm going to say why. So for me and Neil, this chapter, as I said, was a game-changing chapter because this is the first significant signs that we start to see a change in Marcus's attitude to the job he does. So the project on the go is Project Spearmint, which is full throttle between Marcus and Mason. They're the two partners running it. And it's to procure a contract from Espina. And the procurement lady from Espina is giving them a hard time. She is determined to get these fees down from 10 million to at least something reasonable. And Mason brings in a different concept of how to put the proposal, the presentation to Espina. And he brings in a firm, a consultancy firm, CIC, and it's headed up by Gerald Cornelius, who has come up with the idea of building a wall with putting words on the bricks, all about what the firm is about and how they're going to help Espina deliver, Project Spearmint number 2. But it's also here, because Marcus is starting to think, this is not how he does things. This is, we get the indications here that he's not happy here. He doesn't like the way it's been doing, doesn't like open plan officers, and he certainly doesn't like wearing lanyards, doesn't like his name on things. So he's starting to say he doesn't